In America today, there are roughly 657,500 emergency calls made per day. And in the majority of those calls, emergency personnel are required to respond, which puts them out on the roadway, in proximity with other drivers. This also puts them at increased risk for crashes. The worst part is that beyond the dangers of being directly involved in a crash and being injured or killed, it also increases the risk that emergency personnel who have been involved in a crash will be needlessly taken away from a call where someone's life might depend on them being there. Most drivers don't really understand the law when it comes to emergency vehicle driving. Like most states, Idaho has a law that says emergency vehicle drivers are not bound by certain traffic rules if they're operating an emergency vehicle in accordance with the law. The problem is that oftentimes drivers don't react the way they should. And the same law that seems to protect these public servants goes on to say that they must drive with a proper regard for other people's safety. In other words, while they're trying to potentially save someone's life, they have to look out for other road users. That's a tall order. That's why it is the responsibility of every driver to know the proper procedures for reacting and yielding to emergency vehicles. The law itself is divided into two parts. One deals with when you are being approached by the emergency vehicle, and the other when you are approaching an emergency vehicle that is stopped. Let's talk about what to do when you're being approached by an emergency vehicle with its lights and siren activated. When you're driving on the road and you notice you're being approached by an emergency or police vehicle that is either sounding a siren or flashing red or blue lights, you must immediately pull to the nearest curb or the road edge on the right side of the roadway and stop. And you must remain stopped until the emergency vehicle has passed ahead of you. So what do you do when the vehicle is approaching from behind? First, slow down. Check the flow of traffic around you. Your first reaction might be to pull over immediately, before you really know that it's safe. As soon as your path is clear to the shoulder, activate your turn signal and pull as far to the right as you safely can. Once the emergency vehicle has passed you, make sure to check traffic again, then activate your left turn signal and ease back into traffic. If you're on a highway or freeway, make sure to allow the emergency vehicle to get far enough in front of you that there's no possibility of your being too close to them if they have to stop. Now, what about when the vehicle is approaching from in front of you? Sometimes having an emergency vehicle coming towards you with its lights and siren going can be a little tougher. The best thing to do is still to follow the rule of signaling and pulling to the right as soon as it is safe. Remember also that oftentimes in congested areas, emergency vehicles will often drive in the wrong lanes in order to make it through congestion. If you pull to the right as soon as possible, you can leave that lane free for them to proceed. Something to point out here is that the law very clearly says that you must stop. This is to protect you and the emergency vehicle in case it needs to turn in front of you. Many times drivers will assume they know what the emergency vehicle is going to do, and they'll incorrectly anticipate. This is why it's critical to stop completely and allow the vehicle driving under lights and siren to pass you. That's how you can be certain you won't interfere with their driving. So what should you do when you're approaching a stopped emergency vehicle with its lights on? Idaho's Move Over law has been in force for a number of years, and essentially says that when you're approaching a stationary police or other authorized emergency vehicle displaying flashing lights, you're required by law to either move over or slow down until you've passed them. If you're on a roadway with 2 or more lanes in the same direction, and you're approaching an emergency or police vehicle that is stopped with lights flashing, you're required to immediately reduce your speed below the posted speed limit and proceed with caution. Then you're also required to change lanes into a lane that is not adjacent to the emergency vehicle as soon as possible. if it's safe to do so. It's a bit different for smaller highway and roads. If you're traveling on a one-lane road or a roadway with one lane in each direction of travel, the law requires you to immediately reduce your speed below the posted speed limit, and then maintain a safe speed for the conditions until you're completely past the emergency vehicle. When emergency personnel are on their way to the scene of an emergency, they must focus on getting to the call. The best way you can help them is to be as predictable as you can possibly be when you're driving near or under lights or siren. A good way to keep this in the forefront of your mind is to try and think of how you might feel if you or someone close to you was the one needing their immediate assistance. Would you want them slowed or detained for even 1 second longer because the driver didn't know what to do? In this section, we started out by talking about excessive speed and its dangers. We also talked about speed limits here in our state. Then we moved into the topics of yielding the right-of-way. And finally, we talked about what you must do as a driver when dealing with emergency vehicles, when they're under lights or siren. In our next segment, we're going to learn about how we know about the road ahead. We'll look at signs and signals and pavement markings and all the messages that they can give us.